There is a specific kind of silence that follows a polite corporate assassination. It doesn't echo like a gunshot. It settles heavy and suffocating like dust over a ruined room. We are taught that the workplace is a meritocracy, a sterile environment where hard work translates directly into upward momentum. But anyone who has spent more than a week in a swivel chair knows the truth. Careers are often held hostage by fragile egos and petty grievances. The best revenge, they say, is living well. But sometimes the universe offers something far sweeter. A moment where the sabotage of a bitter rival becomes the exact catalyst for the greatest triumph and the deepest connection of your life. The fluorescent lights in the third-floor conference room had a relentless humming buzz. It was a Tuesday, the kind of mid-morning where coffee has lost its magic and everyone is just waiting for lunch. Thatcher sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his cuffs rolled up precisely to his forearms, projecting an aura of casual dominance. He was a man who wore too much bergamot cologne and possessed an uncanny ability to absorb the competence of those around him. We were presenting the final architecture for a massive logistics rollout. Thatcher clicked to the final slide, leaned back, and steepled his fingers. And that is how I restructured the backend integration to save us 14% on cloud overhead. He hadn't touched the backend. He couldn't even read the code if his life depended on it. I had spent 3 weekends writing that integration alongside 2 junior developers. I didn't shout. I didn't slam my fists on the table. I simply waited for the murmurs of approval from the upper management to die down, then cleared my throat. I'm glad you're pleased with the results, Thatcher. My team and I put a lot of late nights into that specific code block. If the board has any granular questions about the API pathways, I'd be happy to walk them through my architecture. The room temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. Thatcher's smile remained plastered to his face, but his eyes turned into chips of flint. He gave a slight, rigid nod. Of course, a team effort. I assumed that was the end of it, a minor correction of the record. 4 months later, I accepted a role at a different firm. On my last day, Thatcher shook my hand with that same manufactured smile, wishing me the best. I walked out of the glass double doors feeling nothing but relief, entirely unaware that I had just left a loaded gun sitting on the table. 2 years evaporated into the grind of the industry. I was ready for a leap, aggressively pursuing a senior director role at a burgeoning tech firm called Apex Core. That was where I met Vesper. Vesper was one of Apex's co-founders, and from the moment she walked into the interview room, the air shifted. She had dark, inquisitive eyes that seemed to dismantle my resume and my defenses simultaneously. She didn't ask the standard, mind-numbing questions about greatest weaknesses or 5-year plans. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, and asked how I would handle a total systemic failure with a hostile client breathing down my neck. Our first interview was scheduled for 45 minutes. It lasted 2 hours. There was a crackle of electricity between us that defied the sterile environment of a job interview. We debated market strategies with a rapid-fire cadence, our words overlapping, finishing each other's thought experiments. I found myself drawn not just to her razor-sharp intellect, but to the subtle, dry humor she wove into her critiques. By the third round of interviews, a lunch meeting at a dimly lit bistro down the street from the Apex office, the professional boundaries were beginning to blur at the edges. Over plates of charred octopus and bitter greens, she told me about her stubborn refusal to compromise the company's ethical standards, and I told her about my relentless drive to build systems that actually mattered. I watched the way she played with the stem of her water glass, the way she laughed at my sarcastic summary of venture capitalist buzzwords. I was falling for her. It was entirely unprofessional, wildly inconvenient, and absolutely undeniable. By the time we parted ways on the sidewalk, the job offer felt like a formality. I wanted the role desperately, but more than that, I wanted the right to take her out to dinner without the looming shadow of an HR conflict. Then 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Vesper, but the warmth that had characterized our lunch was gone. Her voice was clipped, carefully neutral. "Kaelen, do you have a minute?" My stomach tightened always. "What's going on?" I heard the faint sound of a pen clicking on the other end of the line. "I was finalizing your reference checks this morning. The 2 you provided were glowing. But I noticed a gap in your documentation regarding your time before your last firm. I checked your LinkedIn, saw Thatcher was your direct manager, and reached out to him." A cold spike of adrenaline shot through my chest. Thatcher. 2 years later, and his name still tasted like pennies. I see, I managed to say, keeping my tone perfectly level. He painted a very specific picture, Vesper continued, her voice tight. He told me you were incredibly difficult to work with. He used the phrases insubordinate and not a team player. He strongly advised against hiring you. The silence stretched out between us. I closed my eyes, picturing Thatcher sitting in his office, probably smirking at his screen, thrilled that his petty grievance had finally found its mark. But the anger was secondary to a profound, hollow ache. Vesper was a pragmatist. A co-founder protecting her company. Why would she risk hiring a wildcard when there were a dozen other safe candidates? I was going to lose the position and with it any chance of seeing her again. Kaelen, she prompted softly. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I refused to be defensive. I refused to let Thatcher dictate my narrative. Vesper, I'm not going to speak ill of Thatcher's management style, I began, my voice steady, devoid of panic. But I will give you the context of that review. During a massive deployment, he presented a highly complex integration to the executive board and claimed sole credit for the architecture. It was work entirely designed and executed by myself and two junior developers. I politely corrected the record in front of the board to ensure my team received the recognition they earned. He smiled, agreed, and apparently held a grudge for 2 years. I paused, listening to the quiet hum of the phone line. I don't expect you to take my word for it. In fact, you shouldn't. I'm going to email you the names and personal numbers of Jaren and Mail, the two developers on that project. Ask them about my leadership. Ask them who wrote the code. And ask them why they both quit within 3 months of my departure. There was a long pause. Okay, Vesper finally said. The chill in her voice had thawed slightly. Send me the numbers. The weekend was absolute agony. I spent Saturday pacing my apartment, staring out at the rain-slicked city streets. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart hammered against my ribs, only to sink when it was just an alert or a spam email. I kept replaying our lunch in my head, the shared smiles, the easy rhythm of our conversation. Had I imagined the connection, would a few poisoned words from a mediocre middle manager be enough to sever it? By Monday morning, I had resigned myself to a rejection. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop to begin the grueling process of job hunting all over again. At 9:14 a.m. the phone rang. Vesper's name flashed on the screen. I answered on the first ring. Kaelen. I spoke to Jaren, Vesper said, skipping the pleasantries, and Mail. I actually spent about 40 minutes on the phone with Mail yesterday evening. And I heard a soft exhale on the other end, followed by a warm, familiar laugh. Mail told me that if I didn't hire you, I was an idiot, and that she would personally track me down to tell me so. The tension in my shoulders collapsed all at once. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 days. Thatcher is a liability, Vesper continued, her tone shifting from executive to something much more intimate. But more importantly, you didn't panic when I confronted you. You didn't badmouth him, you just presented the facts and offered the proof. That's exactly the kind of grace under fire I need in a senior director. The offer letter is in your inbox. I bumped the base salary up by 5%. Call it a hazard pay for having to deal with toxic ex-bosses. I accept, I said immediately, and Vesper, thank you for actually doing the digging. I didn't want to believe him, she admitted quietly. I was hoping you'd prove him wrong. 6 weeks later, I was fully entrenched at Apex Core. The transition was seamless, the work was invigorating, and my proximity to Vesper only confirmed what I had suspected during those early interviews. Working alongside her was intoxicating. We frequently found ourselves the last two in the office, sketching out product roadmaps on the whiteboard, fueled by lukewarm takeout and sheer ambition. It was a Friday evening in late November. The office was deserted, the city lights outside casting a golden glow over the sleek, minimalist furniture of the executive lounge. We were sitting on the low leather sofa, 2 glasses of bourbon resting on the glass table between us. We had just finalized the quarterly strategy, and the exhaustion was the good kind, the kind that comes from building something you actually believe in. My phone, resting face up on the table, lit up with a notification. Vesper glanced at it, then raised an eyebrow. LinkedIn. I picked it up, unlocking the screen. A grim smile touched my lips. You're not going to believe this. I tilted the screen toward her. The notification read, Thatcher Sterling has viewed your profile. He had seen it. He had seen the new title, the new company, the undeniable proof that his attempt to bury me had failed spectacularly. I could almost picture him sitting in that same fluorescent-lit office, staring at his monitor in bitter disbelief. Vesper let out a rich, melodic laugh. She shifted closer on the sofa, her shoulder brushing against mine. The physical proximity sent a jolt of heat straight through my chest. "Do you think he knows?" she murmured, her dark eyes looking up at me, the teasing edge fading into something softer, heavier. "Do you think he knows that his little character assassination is the reason I realized how much I trust you?" "I think," I replied, my voice dropping an octave as I turned to face her fully, "that Thatcher is a man who rarely understands the consequences of his actions. But I am incredibly grateful for his incompetence." Vesper held my gaze. The witty banter, the corporate shields, the careful professional distance, it all dissolved in the span of a single heartbeat. She reached out, her cool fingers lightly tracing the line of my jaw. "I don't want to talk about Thatcher anymore," she whispered. "Neither do I." When I kissed her, it wasn't a tentative exploration. It was a collision of everything we had been holding back since that afternoon in the bistro. It tasted of bourbon and relief, a fiercely electric connection that wiped away the bitter residue of the past 2 years entirely. She pulled me closer, her hand knotting in the fabric of my shirt, and as the city traffic hummed stories beneath our window, I knew I had finally found exactly where I was meant to be. We let the silence settle over us, comfortable and secure. I didn't type out a gloating message to Thatcher. I didn't block him. I simply set the phone face down on the table, wrapped my arm around the woman who had seen the truth, and left him exactly where he belonged. Completely ignored and entirely in the past. True vindication rarely looks like a dramatic showdown. It doesn't require shouting matches or carefully plotted revenge. It simply requires you to maintain your integrity when others abandon theirs. Toxic people will always attempt to drag you down to their level, using deceit and sabotage as their weapons. But the truth has an undeniable weight to it. When you stand firm in who you are, the right people, the people who actually matter, will see through the smoke. They will recognize your character not by the absence of accusations against you, but by how gracefully you handle them. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. We share tales of resilience, justice, and the unexpected ways life rewards those who refuse to compromise their values. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had a boss try to sabotage your path, and how did you overcome it? Stay strong, keep your standards high, and I'll see you in the next video.